Picture your typical morning. You wake up, grab your phone, and start scrolling through the news before you even, get out of bed.
Right, the usual routine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And almost immediately, that familiar tension sets in. You see these headlines about supply chain bottlenecks, AI disrupting industries, geopolitical tension.
Oh, yeah.
And you just get that heavy, pervasive feeling that you are waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, we seem to have this collective expectation that a massive global shutdown is imminent, a clear, definitive collapse of the system. But then you put your phone down, you go to work, your packages arrive, the internet stays on.
Yeah, the shutdown never actually comes.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Instead, we are all just suspended in this exhausting limbo where the world isn't visibly breaking, but it feels incredibly difficult to decipher.
Well, that ambient exhaustion is something almost everyone is feeling right now. I mean, human nature dictates that when society feels that kind of collective burnout, we usually go looking for a villain.
Oh, for sure. We want a bad guy.
Right. We want a conspiracy to uncover or, a simplistic collapse narrative that gives us someone clear to blame. But if we analyze the structural data of how the globe operates today, that is fundamentally not what is happening. We are experiencing something much deeper and much quieter.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at a stack of fascinating architectural texts that analyze global systems.
Yes.
And to give you some context, we're primarily pulling from two major sources today. The first is this dense structural analysis paper known as GOA-31, which essentially maps out modern global operational architecture.
It's a massive document.
It really is. And the second is LMOS, which is an analytical framework. So think of it as a cognitive operating system designed to help intelligence analysts and logistics planners process incredibly complex environments.
Exactly.
Our goal is to use these texts to understand why the world isn't crashing, but is instead becoming completely unreadable. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we actually begin to untangle a system this tangled?
We begin by completely abandoning the apocalypse narrative. What's fascinating here is that we are not witnessing a sudden system failure, but rather a profound phase transition.
A phase transition.
Yeah. The GOA-31 document describes our current global state as a silent heat accumulation. And to truly grasp what that means, we have to unlearn our classical historical definition of what a crisis actually looks like.
Okay, so let's define that old baseline. Historically, a crisis was binary, right?
Right.
It was highly visible.
Yeah.
And it usually manifested as a physical stop. Like an invading army blockades a key port.
Yes.
The stock market physically crashes and trading halts.
Yeah.
A hurricane takes down the power grid and the lights literally go out. Or, on a personal level, you break your arm and the bone is clearly snapped on an x-ray.
It's obvious.
Yeah, it's clean in a terrible, undeniable way. You can point your finger right at it.
You could point to it and definitively say there is the crisis. I mean, the parameter was simply, is the system running or is the system broken? Today, however, the crisis isn't binary. It is probabilistic. The global system is still absolutely running, but the sheer effort required to keep it running, the cognitive load needed just to interpret the rules of the road from 1 hour to the next, is skyrocketing.
Wow. The analogy that helps me visualize this shift is looking at how computers fail. Think about a computer from 20 years ago. When it crashed, it hard crashed.
Oh, the blue screen of death?
Exactly. You get the blue screen of death. The machine was dead. You had to physically restart it. That is your classical binary crisis. But what we're dealing with now is a computer that hasn't crashed to a blue screen. Instead, the spinning wheel of death is constantly on.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it.
Technically, the applications are still open. The cursor moves. But every single action, every click, takes massive cognitive overhead from the machine.
Right, and the sources explicitly point out that ships are still passing through major maritime straits. Global markets are processing millions of trades a second. Billions of dollars in AI investments are flowing effortlessly. You can still connect to Wi-Fi, order groceries to your door, log into your company's servers.
The physical stuff works.
The infrastructure is highly operational. But what is failing on a massive scale is our ability to interpret it. The unreadability of the system is multiplying, leading to what the texts call a distributed judgment load.
A distributed judgment load. That phrase feels incredibly relevant to anyone listening who feels overwhelmed at their job right now.
Absolutely.
The crisis has shifted from physical machinery stopping to a massive influx of unexplainability. Suddenly, a middle manager in logistics, or an insurance adjuster, or a software auditor is carrying the weight of constantly reevaluating whether their basic daily tasks are still compliant.
Or safe, or even legal. We are moving from an era where the dominant question was simply, is it working? To a new era where we must constantly ask, under what conditions is it working, and who carries the responsibility if a microscopic variable slips?
Right, so let's ground this theory in the real-world examples the sources provide, because that's where this gets really tangible. GOA-31 spends a lot of time analyzing the oceans.
It does, yeah.
Specifically, the Strait of Hormuz, the emergence of shadow fleets, and this increasingly common phenomenon of massive cargo ships simply turning off their AIS, like their automatic tracking systems, so they vanish from commercial radar.
Yeah, the maritime shipping industry is the ultimate case study of a system becoming unreadable rather than stopping.
But wait, let me push back on this premise for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
If a crude oil tanker turns off its transponder, but it still physically navigates through the Strait of Hormuz, and millions of barrels of oil still arise at a port in Asia, what is the actual problem?
Yeah.
I mean, the engine runs, the ocean is navigable, the cargo arrives. Isn't physical movement the only metric that really matters for a supply chain at the end of the day?
That perspective, that movement is the only metric, is exactly the paradigm the GOA-31 authors argue we have to pivot away from. Yeah. 50 years ago, yes, movement was everything. Can things still move? If the answer was yes, the global economy was healthy.
Right.
But today, the core issue is, under what conditions can they move? And who holds the bag when the invisible variables change? The physical water in the strait might be perfectly clear and navigable, but the probabilistic waters surrounding that ship are an absolute nightmare.
Okay, so the physical cargo is moving smoothly, but the invisible scaffolding around the ship is fracturing.
Exactly. Think about the overlapping probabilities acting on that single moving ship. You have a patchwork of constantly updating economic sanctions from different nations.
Oh, wow, right.
You have the threat of unexpected military inspections. You have the severe risk of misidentification by autonomous military drones patrolling the airspace. You have the threat of cyber attacks targeting the ship's navigation software.
It's just layer after layer.
And perhaps most critically to the global economy, you have the sudden algorithmic suspension of maritime insurance.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that insurance factor. Because a ship without insurance isn't just a boat on the water, it's a massive floating liability.
Totally. Imagine the ship enters a zone flagged by an automated geopolitical risk monitor. The shipping company's insurance algorithm instantly recalculates the threat level and automatically suspends coverage mid-voyage.
Wow. While it's still on the water.
Yes, the ship hasn't stopped physically, but legally and financially, it is paralyzed. Now, the cargo owner's legal department in London has to instantly flag a compliance breach.
Right.
The receiving port authority in Tokyo demands new documentation. The corporate lawyers, the logistics coordinators, the risk adjusters, they are suddenly forced into a state of exhausting recalculation to figure out if that moving ship is even legally allowed to dock.
It is decision paralysis masquerading as forward motion. The physical boat is just a ghost haunting a legal system that has totally frozen. And what's wild is that the texts draw direct parallels from these oceans to completely different industries. They say this exact same dynamic is playing out in AI auditing, cyber risk, and global food supply chains. How does this look in, say, a food supply chain?
Well, take a shipment of grain from South America to Europe. The tractors work, the grain is harvested, the physical cranes at the port are operational.
So the physical system is fine.
Right. But a cyber risk audit suddenly flags a vulnerability in the port's automated inventory software. Simultaneously, algorithmic commodity pricing triggers a secondary review based on a new environmental compliance law in the destination country.
Oh, man.
So the grain sits in silos, slowly rotting. Not because of a physical blockade or a famine, but because the compounding compliance checks, digital audits, and liability debates create an unreadable environment. The food supply chain didn't break physically, it drowned in unreadability.
And the mechanism behind this paralysis across all these industries, whether it's grain or oil or software, is what the authors call the shear.
Yes, the great shear.
They argue there's a structural cause to this unreadability, driven by the friction between the different operating systems of the modern world.
The concept of the shear is central to understanding that silent heat accumulation we talked about earlier. It maps the tension between what they define as the fast OS layer and the slow OS layer.
Right. So to put an analogy to this, Imagine you're trying to run a lightning-fast, ultra-modern video game from 2026 on a laptop with a 15-year-old graphics card.
That's a great way to picture it.
The software of the game is demanding a million calculations a second. It wants to render massive worlds instantly. But the physical graphics card literally, mechanically cannot keep up. The friction between the demands of the software and the physical limitations of the hardware generates massive literal heat. And eventually the plastic and silicon start to warp.
That warping is exactly what we are observing on a geopolitical scale. Let's look at the layers they define. The FastOS layer consists of our digital and financial infrastructure.
Right.
This is artificial intelligence, algorithmic trading, global capital flows, and automated digital networks. These systems demand instant reaction. They operate on instant synchronization, processing variables in milliseconds.
They demand a definitive answer right now.
Exactly. But underneath that, you have the slow OS layer. These are our physical and societal institutions. This is physical logistics, like trucks on a highway.
Yeah.
It's the legal system, which requires deliberation and precedent. It's international diplomacy. And it includes what the text beautifully refers to as life membranes. Our everyday community structures, human cognition, and post-crisis recovery.
Those take time.
They do. These systems are inextricably bound by physical slow time. You cannot instantly synchronize a new legal framework, just as you cannot instantly force humans to build trust.
So you have algorithmic trading platforms and AI models yanking the leash, changing the variables of global trade every millisecond. And the slow physical world, the courts, the cargo ships, the regulators, is just being dragged violently behind, trying to bridge the gap.
Yes. The texts frame it as a widening gap between the controlled domain and the chaos domain. The FastOS layer deals with the controlled domain, code, capital, things that can be easily manipulated.
Right.
The slow OS layer deals with the chaos domain, unpredictable weather, human emotion, physical wear and tear. Because the fast layer is constantly dragging the slow layer forward to keep up with its processing speed, we generate that silent heat.
Which manifests as institutional fatigue. The graphics card doesn't explode into a fireball, but the judgment cost, the sheer psychological weight of constantly trying to reconcile ultra-fast algorithms with slow physical reality sinks squarely onto the shoulders of the slow layer.
Exactly.
The compliance officers, the legal clerks, the truck drivers, they are the ones absorbing the heat of the shear.
Well, and here's the thing. The GOA-31 authors don't stop at maritime law or cybersecurity. They apply this friction to societal psychology, introducing a concept called chronic depolarization.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break down the actual biology of that term, because it makes the societal impact so much clearer.
Okay, yeah.
In biology, for a cell, like a neuron in your brain, to fire and send a signal, it undergoes a process called depolarization. The electrical charge inside the cell flips. But after it fires, the cell needs a refractory period.
It needs to rest.
Right. It has to pause, reset its chemical balance, and repolarize before it can fire again. If you constantly stimulate that neuron, bombarding it with signals without giving it time to reset, it stays in a state of chronic depolarization. It becomes completely exhausted and literally paralyzed. It cannot fire at all.
That biological mechanism is a perfect mirror for modern human cognition under the shear. Society is trapped in an environment of constant connection, constant monitoring, and constant demands for explanations.
It's just endless.
The 24/7 news cycle, the endless notifications, the shifting geopolitical anxieties, they act as constant stimuli.
We never get a refractory period. We never get to reset.
We don't. And as a result, our collective ability to make definitive judgments is paralyzed. The modern struggle is defined by distributed responsibility. When an AI system updates its model autonomously and accidentally crashes a local real estate market, who is legally responsible? The original coder, the current CEO, the dataset providers, the algorithm itself.
The boundaries are just blurring everywhere.
Exactly. When we are chronically depolarized, our default reaction is to hunt for a clear binary answer. We want to know who is evil because a villain is easy to process.
We desperately want to point at the broken bone and say, there is the crisis.
But in an unreadable world, the crisis is the unexplainability itself.
Which seamlessly brings us to the methodology in our second source, LMOS. If society is chronically depolarized and the world is paralyzed by probabilistic unreadability, how do intelligence analysts or just regular people process information without losing their minds?
LMOS offers a very pragmatic framework for this. It argues that if the crisis is no longer binary, then our old methods of consuming information, searching desperately for what is 100% objectively correct or 100% demonstrably false, are totally obsolete.
The LMOS framework says we need to stop agonizing over binary truth in the moment and instead start reading what they call gradients.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about our instinct when consuming news. When we see a highly biased article or a pundit shouting extreme rhetoric on television or a sudden irrational panic in the financial markets, our first instinct is to dismiss it.
Right.
We say, that's fake news or that's just market noise, and we try to filter it out to find the objective, verifiable truth.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise entirely.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we stop looking for the objective truth and start treating heavily biased pundits or irrational market panics as valuable data points, aren't we just legitimizing misinformation? Aren't we encouraging the exact kind of noise that depolarizes us in the first place?
I see what you're saying.
But, I mean, if someone is screaming something demonstrably false on the news, it's false. Why should we validate it as a gradient?
That is the critical distinction LMOS makes. You are not validating the content of the rhetoric. You are not saying the pundit is factually correct. You are analyzing the emotion and the bias itself as a vital sensor.
Oh, censor.
Yeah. The world isn't about absolute certainty right now. It is about plausibility and pressure. When you see extreme fear or a massive, coordinated push for a specific narrative, you shouldn't just exhaust yourself trying to fact-check the minutia. You should step back and ask, where is the structural pressure coming from that makes this narrative appealing?
Okay, I see the distinction. It's like looking at a geological fault line. If an earthquake destroys a town, you aren't debating whether the earthquake was wrong or misinformed.
All right, you can't argue with an earthquake.
You are measuring the seismic waves to figure out exactly where the tectonic plates underground are grinding together.
That is the perfect application of a gradient. The emotion shows you exactly where the membrane tension is highest between the fast OS and the slow OS.
Okay, give me an example of that tension.
Well, if there is a massive, irrational public panic about AI auditing, stealing jobs, the gradient isn't about whether AI will literally destroy the world tomorrow. The gradient shows you that the slow OS of our labor laws and human identity is currently being stretched to its absolute breaking point by the fast OS of technological capability. You learn to read the heat, not just the text.
So if you are listening to this and you are feeling that constant, high-load state of exhaustion, it might be because you are burning all your cognitive energy trying to find clean, binary answers in a global operating system that now only functions in probabilities and gradients.
Exactly. The system is still highly active, but it is increasingly difficult to judge. It is operational, but deeply unpredictable.
So bringing this all together, what does this mean for you tomorrow morning? If we are moving permanently away from the old readable world into this state of constant unreadability and distributed responsibility, how are we supposed to navigate our careers, our supply chains, or even our daily routines?
This is where the synthesis of these texts delivers its most vital takeaway. Because the fundamental environment has changed, our fundamental metrics for success have to change. For the last 50 to 60 years, the ultimate goals of global architecture were correctness, speed, and optimization.
Right. Make the supply chain faster, make the code flawless. Strip out every single redundancy to make the factory perfectly efficient.
But in an unreadable, probabilistic world, extreme optimization becomes incredibly fragile. If you optimize a global logistics network to be perfectly lean, the moment a probabilistic crisis hits, like that sudden insurance suspension in the Strait of Hormuz, the entire network seizes up.
Because there's no slack.
Exactly, you have no buffer. So the new survival metric, according to these operational frameworks, is something called resynchronizability.
Resynchronizability. Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that.
It demands that we ask a completely different set of questions about our systems. The goal is no longer, can we prevent all failure? The goal is, can you return after a failure?
Can you bounce back?
Right. Can your system safely pause, tolerate a disruption, and then safely reconnect to the broader network?
It is the architectural ability to tolerate a local gap. If one specific part of your supply chain goes down, or frankly, if one part of your personal life falls out of rhythm, can you hold that inefficiency without forcing the rest of the system to overcompensate and shatter?
A great way to visualize resynchronizability is to think of a live jazz band.
Oh, I like that.
They are operating in a highly complex improvisational environment. If the bassist misses a beat, the whole band doesn't stop playing, put down their instruments, and restart the song from the beginning.
Right, they just keep going.
They have a massive degree of resynchronizability, they adjust, they tolerate the local friction, and they seamlessly catch the rhythm on the next measure.
Contrast that jazz band with the perfectly optimized high-speed factory assembly line. If one machine on that line is a single millimeter out of alignment, the entire factory floor has to be shut down. Sirens go off. Everything stops.
Sure.
The assembly line is perfectly optimized, but it has zero resynchronizability.
And in a world defined by distributed responsibility, shadow fleets, and sheer operational complexity, you want to build the jazz band, not the assembly line.
Yeah.
Whether you are designing a new legal framework for cyber audits, managing a corporate logistics network, or just structuring your own mental health routines, you want systems that can safely pause, absorb the unreadability, and reconnect.
Which leads us with this final lingering thought. If our survival and success in this new unreadable era depend almost entirely on resynchronizability, on our structural ability to safely pause, tolerate friction, and slowly catch the beat again, are we currently building our artificial intelligence, our global markets, and our own digital habits to optimize for the exact opposite?
That's the real question.
Are we engineering a world that is so fast, so demanding, and so flawlessly synchronized that it literally cannot afford to stop spinning for even a second? Something to chew on the next time you're staring at that spinning wheel on your screen, waiting for a crash that never quite comes.